we throw the word game changing out a lot, especially in film circles. You hear that word a lot. But this is one of the first times in recent memory where I saw something, and those are the first word that came to mind was game changing. I think that's what this deal between AMC Theaters and Universal Studios is. Essentially, what it is that they've struck a deal, and if you remember, not long ago, very early in the quarantine, when Universal had the gall to release Trolls World Tour onto video on demand for $20 a rental to try to get some of the money back with theaters being closed, AMC had a conniption fit and said they weren't going to show Universal movies anymore, as laughable as that was. Because Universal, too, is responsible for the upcoming F9, new Fast and the Furious movie. They're responsible for the next Minions movie to come out. And they're also responsible for this new Jessica Alba thriller at the beginning of next year, 355. But anyway, moreover, is that they struck a deal, AMC and Universal, that essentially says that 17 days after a movie receives a theatrical release, a Universal movie, it is permitted to go to video on demand for the rental price of $20, like we've seen over the last few months with Scoob, King of Staten Island, Trolls World Tour. Handful of movies have done that. This is big because going forward with the details, AMC will get a cut of the video on demand sales, which is good for them. And also, too, Universal is prohibited from lowering the price of the movie for 3 months after it is initially released. They can't drop it down to $3.99 or $6.99 until 3 months after the movie's initial release. This is big. And I say this for a couple of reasons. I'm trying not to look at this glass half empty because I think it is in some ways good for the consumer. But however, though, this has been on my mind. We were talking about this back on the radio show, I believe. We had a couple segments where we even talked about this. It's going to get to a point, and keep in mind this is only Universal. Universal's a huge player. But I have a hard time believing other studios aren't going to try to finagle a deal like this, or at least talk to AMC or Cinemark even, and come up with alternate deals. But this feels like the foundational step for when theaters are going to only show the big movies. Your Marvel movies, your Pixar movies, your blockbusters. This is what it feels like. It feels like movies like, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, movies like Book Club, movies like even The Lovebirds. I know it didn't come to theaters.
Anything
but
by A24.
Anything by A24. It feels like these movies are going to get shafted. And these are going to be movies where Universal's going to say, do we want to put it in theaters or do you want to put it on video on demand? And it's going to get to a point, too, I think, that for the tentpole movies like Fast 9, like Minions, they're going to be fine. Those are event movies as is. But that's what the multiplex is going to become pretty soon, is, if it's not already, an event for families and such. Less so the fact that you would be going there to maybe discover movies. Hell, maybe seeing a trailer before another movie and thinking, I'd like to see that. And then after the trailer in a theater, it's going to be wild to see coming to video on demand or something like that. I have a lot of thoughts on this. I don't want to go too heavy-handed right out the gate. I'll start with you, Dominic. Your thoughts on this?
My first reaction, honestly, adapt or die. Right. Honestly, this is just out with the old, in with the new, or at least at the very least mentality. I don't know what kind of shuffling goes around and how many people they're probably going to fire as a result of mergers. But in terms of how this will affect the consumers, it's like, okay, this is the invisible hand of the free market at work. And again, how many people that'll affect, we don't really go into that much. But as for the business end of things, yeah, it was really a matter of time. Honestly, it would have been really entertaining to see how much further AMC and Universal probably would have held out on each other's whims, while the rest of the streaming world, like Netflix and Amazon and Google, slowly take over. I don't know how Google's doing exactly. I'm sure better because of the pandemic, but in ratio to the rest of the companies, I'm not quite sure. I have to see the numbers on that. I think Google's okay, but as for Universal and AMC, it's really just a matter of time. This is the article we were probably all predicting in the back of our minds Or the other one, which was that a bunch of rich dudes just got real stubborn and just tanked it for everyone else. But I don't know. At least we get more movies on VOD now.
Yeah, before I throw it over to you, Joe, I want to say this. I see the good in this. I really do. And I see the inevitability in some ways, too. I see the good in it based on this idea. Because keep in mind, we got to remember, this is Universal so far. This is Universal's catalog. The thing that makes me somewhat optimistic is that perhaps movies that people wouldn't have gone and seen in theaters, the lesser known movies, the movies didn't have several $1 million marketing budget behind them, maybe people would be more inclined to watch those at home. Because at the end of the day, I'm also a big proponent, as much as I love the theater experience, and these two kind of clash in my mind very often, I'm a big proponent of theater going, and I'm a big proponent of accessibility. And that's what this comes down to, is accessibility for movies, good movies, and movies that people should see. That's what leaves me optimistic. On top of that, I've argued also in the past for years that I think one of the main reasons that you see less people going to the movies beyond just the price tag is the shrinking theatrical to streaming, it used to be theatrical to DVD. Now it's really streaming. The shrinking theatrical to streaming window. It used to be when we were all kids, which wasn't that long ago in retrospect. When we were kids, it used to be you'd have to wait about a year before a movie that came to theaters.
I remember that.
Was released on DVD. It was a long-ass time. And, like, if it was a Christmas movie, you were waiting exactly a year, like Fred Claus or, like, Elf. Those didn't come to I'm serious. Those didn't come to DVD.
Why did you think of Fred Claus?
Because I just remember that was one of the last movies I always remember that was released in like the Christmas season and didn't come to DVD until the following Christmas.
Sure, fair enough.
I always remember the Harry Potter movies, like, because as a kid growing up, I mean, that was the big thing with our generation with those movies. And I didn't see the third one, I think, in theaters, so I had to wait a year for it to come out on DVD before I can rent it from when Blockbuster still existed.
I have this theory that is how fandom and fan fiction was able to grow so fervently under Harry Potter, because they had nothing to do for a year except make up their own shit. But go ahead.
That's a true point too.
Theory.
But it used to be you'd have to wait a long time before you got to see a movie on home video. It's just the way it was. And keep in mind too, if we have younger people watching this too who have always known a shorter theatrical to home video window, you got to remember too, the internet wasn't as big back in the early aughts, and even with people that had the internet and computers in their home, because it was still not commonplace, broadband connection prevented like really any kind of video streaming. Hell, YouTube didn't come around till 2005. And even when it did, I remember it would take like half an hour to load a video if you had poor connection, because it just couldn't handle it.
Remember this is total number bears. Remember the 15-minute time window? The limit for YouTube, I think it was 15, right?
It was about 10 minutes. So you'd be like 10 to 15, yeah.
Enemy at the Gates, part 7 of 28.
Yeah. I remember one of the first movies I remember on YouTube was Superbad in like 11 parts.
Yeah.
I remember that, and it's amazing. You try to upload that now, man, you're getting a copyright strike. Joe, your thoughts on AMC Universal's deal?
I mean, honestly, I'm kind of like in the same boat as you, that this is better for consumer-wise, because, I thought back to when MoviePass first started, and how that was actually getting a lot more people to get out to the theater to go see smaller films, because it's just like, well, why not? I'm already paying for this pass. I think this might help smaller films again, because it's just like, okay, well, I'm stuck at home tonight. I might as well just pop on Uncut Gems, Parasite, wherever the hell it might be. But it does suck that, we don't get to see, if it becomes like, hey, the smaller films now just only go to video on demand, while the bigger movies go to the theater. It's going to suck when we can't see stuff like, imagine The Lighthouse. We got to watch, like, seeing that on the big screen was really nice. I enjoyed that. Seeing a movie like Parasite in theaters with a packed crowd, that was an experience I really enjoyed. It's going to suck that, like, if this video on demand thing starts taking away the smaller films away from theaters and only leaving the big players out there, so franchises or, blockbuster films, it's going to suck that, like, I can't have that experience all over again. I'm just going to have to be, like, what I did with The Irishman, which was watch it on Netflix at home on my couch being like, damn, I wish I could see this on a theater screen.
Yeah, and like I said, nobody knows how exactly this is going to play out because again, I contend, and I don't think you two will argue with me here. Fast Nine's going to be five. Fast Nine's going to
Yeah.
still make big money at the theater. Minions is still going to make big money in the theater too, and I don't want to bring up the Christopher Nolan movie that shall not be named, but another reason too that like these big movies will not come to video on demand too is another thing before they get a theatrical release. Because
Yeah.
I've seen people still talk about that and still opine that Mulan's going to come to Disney Plus. The reason why that's not going to happen, I'll tell you right here to kind of bookend this conversation, because I would bet that we're going to revisit this at some later point. But I'll end with this. The reason you're not going to see movies like Mulan or Tenet come to video on demand in lieu of the pandemic is there's too great a loss that they're never going to recoup on video on demand. And the other problem is, too, and AMC cannot control this, and I still think that this is what they're worried about with Universal movies, too. The second movies come to video on demand or streaming services, they're on the Pirate Bay. They're on all those illegal movie streaming sites.
Yeah.
So they're never going to recoup their losses on that to begin with. It's just something that's totally out of their control. Couple the fact, too, that you could pay $20 and rent Trolls World Tour and have 10 people over to watch it, where you're not getting money for each individual ticket. So any movie that's getting released to video on demand, barring it's not a fairly medium-sized, medium budget movie, it's going to take an L. It's going to wind up taking an L inevitably because of the fact that you're not getting the single ticket revenue for each person who watches it, and the fact that you're going to be butting up against piracy. That's just an unavoidable thing. Any closing thoughts on this, gentlemen?
I will add that while probably I'm cynical on it, and that mergers will happen, people will lose jobs and offices and whatnot. But I will say one positive of the entire streaming trend, the evolution of consumption, is that more, as you were saying, Steve, more people get to make more movies, more things for us to consume, and that means more work for actors, more work for key grips, more work for editors, more work for translators and subtitleists, whatever, I forget that name, whatever that title is, but I'm
stuff like that.
closed. Yeah, exactly. But just more work for them, and at the very least, I'm happy for it.